Howdy, everybody.
Turn this up in my headphones, Charles.
You got it, partner.
I'm not going to do the voice, the accent.
You're not going to do the voice. Hello, everybody. I'm just going to keep this music playing in the background for a little bit because today is a very special episode. This dramatic spaghetti western royalty-free music can only mean one thing. We're talking about Kingkiller Chronicles in our dramatically titled episode, Kvothe and Denna, the good, the bad, and the crooked. Yeehaw!
I don't know what to say to that.
We're a fantasy western podcast now, so everyone's just gonna have to get used to that.
I don't know how well the joke is gonna land. Do people get the reference to the good, the bad, and the ugly? Who knows?
Well,
but we're here to
those that do, it's gonna
about...
be epic.
They'll love it.
The deep Kingkiller. You have on one sphere, you have the deep lore fans of Kingkiller Chronicles that will get the crooked reference, and then on the other sphere you have western fans that know what the good, the bad, and the ugly is, and then you have that beautiful market that where the two spheres overlap, that sweet middle section that we just directly targeted. You know, the first in the fantasy game doing it.
Yeah, no one has ever played royalty-free western music or well, who knows about that? But they've not done it while talking about Denna and Kvothe's relationship from the Kingkiller Chronicle.
That's right. And what an interesting conversation it is. Fans of the show may know that both of us, but particularly Dylan, has a very strong history on the internet as the defender of the Kvothe-Denna relationship. And we've been kicking around this episode idea for a long time. And we thought, it's been so long. We've been so busy reading First Law and Wheel of Time that we need to give the Kingkiller people out there more content. And we just miss talking about Kingkiller. And it is time.
Yeah. I have been thinking for a while now, behind the scenes, talking to Charles, we need more Kingkiller content because otherwise, the internet will have to face my long ramblings about Denna. And
they'll still have to face that.
Yeah, no, that's true. But they'll have to face more of it because I won't be able to get the catharsis of talking about it on the podcast. And that's their choice. Once they've clicked an episode called The Good, the Bad, and the Crooked, Kvothe and Denna's relationship, they know what they're getting themselves into. They want to hear this in some form, I assume. But otherwise, it's just innocent people on Twitter, on Fantology's Discord, or wherever else that are having to deal with my ramblings.
And you know what I'm realizing, Dylan? That this is an episode in 3 parts.
It is, yes. I did not realize that.
I only realized it just now as we're sitting here recording.
Right. Well, let me do my warning first and let everyone know that it's a good time to turn this down in their headphones if you have not yet read The Name of the Wind and The Wise Man's Fear, because we will play pretty fast and loose. We'll be I want to say like quick on the draw. That's a thing, right?
Yeah, there you go. Quick on the draw.
With spoilers for those 2 books. Everything else, I don't see any reason why we would spoil any other books, but quick on the draw with those spoilers for the 2 main books in the Kingkiller Chronicle as we talk about Kvothe, Charles.
Ooh,
that's
Kvothe.
Better
than
Fantology called them that. Dwoth with a V. D-V-O-T-H-E. Dwoth.
That's pretty brutal. So yeah, as the title suggests, we're gonna break this into 3 parts. The good of what is it? Kvothe, thank you. The bad, parentheses bad, and the controversy, and the crooked, which Rothfuss has weaved into the story of the Kingkiller Chronicles that I'm very excited to get to at the end
Right.
of this. So,
S-
would you like to
So the
navigate the
way
waters here?
I would love to. The way that we've laid this out is that the good is pretty much what it sounds like. What is good about their relationship itself as well as its portrayal, how Rothfuss chooses to depict it, and how he conveys it in his story. The bad is more because both Charles and I really like it. It's going to be a biased take, I'm sure, but it is supposed to be why is there so much hate about Kvothe, and why does the internet seem so bothered by what's going on when it comes to Kvothe and Denna in the Kingkiller Chronicle, despite these books being so beloved? And we'll try to give credence to all of that. And then the third part is the crooked, which is what is the role of the unreliable narration in the Quothena relationship, and we'll discuss that. As you may remember from reading the series, if you're still listening and you were not thrown off by the spoilers, then Denna has a crooked nose, according to Bast in the larger frame story. So we take that, Charles and I do, to mean that maybe the way that Kvothe portrays Denna and his relationship with her is not 100% truthful. I think that's pretty fair to say when it comes to Kvothe.
I
And
would
that'll be the
say that
crooked.
100%. So all that and more to be excited about, but let's get into the good because we have a lot
Right.
to say about this section and what is good about the Quothena relationship. And for us, we are super big on characters, and when it comes to the portrayal of a like real young love will they won't they couple, this was such an honest, beautiful portrayal, and that's why we praise it so much.
Exactly. Yeah. We like to say that it's realistic, it's honest, and it's relatable when you consider the fact that these two are teenagers. I'm going to drop a teaser for this episode. I probably have already by now when you're actually hearing this on Twitter. That's literally just Patrick Rothfuss saying, they're teenagers. And I think that that's a huge piece for me when it comes to the Quothena relationship that we don't want to lose sight of. We know this is a fantasy series for adults, and oftentimes adults can get frustrated looking back on a portrayal of the angstiness that comes with teenage love struckness, if that's a word.
Hmm.
And I think that that's something that Rothfuss does extremely well here is portray a teenage, like, I guess, love interest sort of relationship, because as everyone listening knows, we don't really know the extent to which they actually have a romantic
Right.
relationship, because it's not much has happened in that direction. Yeah, there's just been a lot of this will they won't they thing going on, and I think a lot of us were teenagers once, and we can often relate to that. And I know for me it feels very true to the experience of being a teenager.
Oh, I would agree. And, I think all of us reading this relationship between Quoth and Denna, that might be part of the reaction that we're getting is that it's reminding us of relationships in our own lives. I'll also say, like, yes, Rothfuss nailed this love struck teenager portrayal. And I also feel like us as fantasy fans who have read lots of fantasy books, the kind of commitment to the will they, won't they, awkward teenager romance is kind of unique in the world of fantasy romances. Traditionally we get these epic, like, oh, I'm the humble guy that turns out to be the prince and you're the princess, or that kind of
Yeah.
relationship, and it's much more romanticized and a lot more grandiose. And Quoth as a storyteller recognizes those things, but then when it comes to his own life, it's much more complex, if nothing else. And I think that's what makes this almost like as even as a fantasy romance stand out. It's just the fact that Rothfuss, and I always talk about Rothfuss' commitment to his characters, and this relationship is no exception to that.
Yes, the great Patrick Rothfuss once said, I like to imply more than I like to exply, and then reflect on the fact that exply probably wasn't a word. And I think that that's what's going on here is so much of what Rothfuss is doing with the Kvothe relationship is portraying what he feels is how two teenagers would interact when they're both insecure, when they both have these really rough, tragic backgrounds. We get the sense, though we don't have it revealed yet, 2 books in, what Denna's background is. We get the sense, I feel very strongly, that she's had a pretty tragic background herself. And they're both just figuring out who they are. And to watch two characters that kind of have this like narcissistic but underlying insecure thing going on for themselves try to relate and be vulnerable with each other when they're so young, it is, I think, so like touching, I guess, for me in a weird way. Like
Right.
it's hard to watch at times, but it hits me right in the feels, and I find it so very relatable and complex, like you were saying, Charles. And I think a big thing with Rothfuss is that he's being deliberate in how he's portraying all of this, how he's implying what he's implying. And we do get these moments where, uh, it's like Sim gets on Kvothe for how she's obviously interested in him, and Kvothe kind of dismisses it, where it's like, oh, she hasn't said anything along those lines. And it's super, I think, frustrating for a lot of people, but it's also the kind of thing that it's like Kvothe, as someone as young and inexperienced and all those kind of things, it's hard for him to pick up on what is being implied if
Right.
it's not explicitly
Right.
stated. And I think that's, it's frustrating for readers too when they're like, but it's so clearly being implied.
Yeah, I think you're touching on something really great there when you say it's frustrating because, like, there's multiple reasons why this relationship is good, and part of the reason that people feel frustrating is why it's so good, and that
Yes,
can create
exactly.
some very strong feelings from certain readers. People react to it so strongly, whether they're for it or not. And there's something to be said for the good and the ability to
Yes.
get those reactions from readers as an author. And I know there's a great Patrick Rothfuss quote here that we've pulled that says, some days I feel like Denna is the best character I've ever written because different people feel different ways about her, and they can justify their beliefs with passages from the text. Some days I feel like Denna is my greatest failure as an author because I haven't brought her to you as clearly as I sometimes wish to. Some days I just really want a donut.
Well said by you and Patrick Rothfuss
Yeah,
there,
thanks.
Charles. And I'll say you touch on something that I love so much when you said the frustration that we're feeling is part of what makes it so good
Yeah.
because it's uh, it's eliciting these strong emotional reactions for all of us. I feel frustrated and like sad and hurt even at times reading this series, and there's something, especially around the Quothena relationship, and there's something to the fact that a relationship can make me feel so strongly and make all these people who feel that like it's so frustrating and it really to the point where they dislike it, or maybe it's too relatable and they dislike it. I'm like, I don't know. There's a lot of relationships that we can read in fantasy, and Charles, we've read some of these ourselves, that feel so just like by the books and basic and surface level that it's like, okay, it's fine. I see what the author's doing, but they don't make us feel that much. And the Quoth and Denna relationship makes people feel very strongly in all sorts of different ways, and that gets expressed differently
Yeah.
as love or hate of the
Yeah.
relationship. But I think making people feel that strongly is in itself got to be good when it comes to art.
It's gotta be. And I'm always drawn from that quote where Rothfuss says, the reason why he considers her his greatest failure sometimes is because I haven't brought her to you as clearly as I sometimes wish to.
Mm.
And it gets me thinking, and for to Rothfuss, I would say don't worry about it, man, because the point is it's not clear, and that's like the good in it. There's no way to properly say, oh, these characters are young and confused and also on their own doing their own things that may or may not conflict with each other, and we just don't know that yet because he's trying to tell the story from Kvothe's perspective, so like maybe he wishes to tell us more about Denna, but he's, I'm going to go back to this word committed to telling it through Kvothe's story. And to me, that just adds to all this goodness that we're talking about. It's not clear. It's complicated and it's confusing, and that's what makes it so beautiful.
Wow. I totally agree, Charles. I think you, you said that so well that the fact that we are able to, ooh, like, I mean, the fact that we're able to have these kind of conversations over and over and over again and come up with new things. I mean, what you just said there had me reflect on like totally new stuff. And one of those new things is that like Denna and Kvothe are such a catalyst for discussion and such a catalyst for digging deeper into all of this implicit stuff that hasn't been brought to us in a way that's like hit us over the head with it, that has been maybe not as clear as Rothfuss sometimes wishes to.
Right.
Sometimes. Right. And he's very careful with his words.
Yes.
If anyone's careful with his words, it's Patrick Rothfuss,
Right.
and he used sometimes.
Right.
And I think that that's if he just handed it to us on a silver platter, what we're supposed to think about Kvothe and Denna, Charles, you and I would be far less intrigued by the relationship. The internet would talk about it far less than they do. We probably would not have recorded like multiple episodes at this point that are very Denna focused. And all of that to me is certainly part of this the good section.
Right. And to build up on that, Rothfuss trying to some days communicate to us Denna bring her to us, as the way he wishes to. And I think some of the ways that he does that and what adds to these beautiful moments in Kingkiller Chronicles is these analogies that we often get, because Kvothe can't tell us directly because he doesn't even know, or so in his story, in his perspective, but he can tell us other stories and we can make the connections, and that's between things like Jax and the Moon and Tack, and the fact that Rothfuss can tell these stories or have these moments and have them be such an integral part of all of Kingkiller Chronicle, again, as to that art that we're talking about in Rothfuss' writing style.
Right. And to bring people back up to speed if it's been a little while since they've read the Kingkiller Chronicle, you remember the Jax and the Moon story is basically a story about a child, Jax, who has basically never been happy. And he's always sought after that thing that would make him happy. And he thought if he finally captured the moon, then after all his plight and journey, he'd be happy. And it kind of ends on this, I don't know if bittersweet's the right word, but it ends on this note of, well, if whether or not he's happy, we don't know. That's paraphrasing. Of course, it'd sound much better if I actually pulled the quote that Rothfuss said. And it's kind of this story about, to me anyway, a like journey over destination. It's not about capturing the moon outright. It's about enjoying your time that you do get to spend with something that is, in the moon's case, it's a something that is just wonderful to have in your company, not to have possessed. And I think that the Tack analogy is another good one, Charles. People might remember Tack is the beautiful game. It's basically a board game a la chess, but the point is to enjoy the beautiful game and not to get caught up on just trying to win in a ruthless manner. And again, this sort of journey over destination piece. And I think that so that the Tack one is pretty directly paralleled to Denna, which is this like quote, which is, so I did not try to win her and contented myself with playing a beautiful game, but there was always a part of me that hoped for more, and so there was a part of me that was always a fool. And I think this is something that just, why is it in the good? It's because these analogies are so just beautifully portrayed by Rothfuss, speaking of a
Right.
beautiful game.
And they
And,
apply to so many things too. You
right.
can apply it to the meta of just the
Mm.
nature of Kingkiller Chronicles. You can apply it to Kvothe. It works in so many ways, and it's so subtle yet intricately worked into the story that it's no other way to describe it but art.
Exactly. And that's the thing, right? Kvothe is just another part of this larger theme that Rothfuss is portraying about, like, let's enjoy the journey and all that, because the destination, we know what that is according to
Yeah,
Rothfuss. We know it ends in some form of tragedy. So you just got to enjoy the beautiful game. And I think Kvothe helps establish that. And we'll get into more when we get to the bad. We'll get into, I think, more of the reason why folks don't like that aspect as much, or that can be frustrating for them.
very well said, sir. And speaking of frustration, are we ready to get into the bad air quotes?
Yeah, okay. I do also say I like Denna. I think this gets lost in the mix. I like Denna's like mystery around her. I think she's
Oh yeah.
very like intriguing as a character. And I think also she has witty, good banter, and all those 7 words lines are at least hit me right in the feels. And I'll say that I kind of enjoy the Quoth and Denna back and forth when they're bantering some, and I think that that's also well portrayed, and all this mystery around her is interesting to delve into. But we'll delve into a little bit more of that probably during the discussion of the crooked. So let's get going with the bad.
Well said, sir. We will get into those mysteries more when we unearth the origin of the crooked. But for now, we are in the bad, and when we say bad, we're talking really about like why there's this controversy around Quothena. And it's, we understand it because we had talked about it in the good, where it's like, it's frustrating. We said that multiple times. And it's like, why don't you just express your feelings to each other? This would be over so fast. This is even a sentiment that Quoth has given about other relationships in the
Yes.
Kingkiller Chronicle, which I thought was so funny. He's like, why don't they just tell each other they like each other and move on? And it's like, really, Quoth, you of all people are going to say that? And I think his reaction is a very common one that readers have of Quothena. So it's like, yeah, this is a normal way to feel from the outside, right? Like we're watching these two from the outside as readers and being like, why can't they? But then when we're in Quoth's head and Quoth is lying next to her and they're both like on the rocks or whatever from after swimming and he's just too nervous to make the next move, it's like we feel that. And that is that kind of frustrating, uncomfortable moments that we just want them to connect.
And you make a great point there, Charles, about how it can be even more frustrating for us as readers when Rothfuss has these moments where he's implying and not explying. And I think it can build on that frustration even more. It can be even more aggravating to see that Quoth is capable of seeing the issue with another relationship and say like, what is wrong with
Yeah.
this guy? How does he see that in someone else, but he can't see that in himself, and what's going on with him? So if you don't have this thought process that at least I started going toward, which is like, well, Rothfuss is trying to validate you here. He's not trying to make you more frustrated. He's trying to tell you, like, yes, it's easy when you're outside of the relationship to see that there's something wrong with like two people being unable to be vulnerable and express themselves, but it's so much harder when you're the person that's in it. And I think that's part of why like the bad stuff is like, why are people frustrated? It's like, well, Quoth has we're the people on the outside looking in, and so we're not the ones who are emotionally compromised by the situation to the point where we can't express ourselves or see the forest for the trees, if you will.
Well
So
said.
we can see it's so obvious that Denna and Quoth like each other, and we're like Sim. We're like,
Yeah.
just do the thing, and I think Rothfuss makes us sit with that. And of course, it's like they're often toxic around each other. They're often frustrating, and the scenes are uncomfortable to sit with. But I mean, I'm trying to stick with. It's okay to have those emotional reactions. We are in the bad section, I guess.
Yeah.
And I guess for me, why it hits more as good is because of all these things I feel like Rothfuss is
Yeah,
doing
he's
deliberately.
acknowledged it, he's worked it into the
Yes.
story, and he's made that an integral part of Quoth's character, which is
Mhm.
how it becomes good for me. But I totally understand these feelings. I feel them as well. Another one that I totally am like sympathizing with is that we aren't really that invested in Denna a lot of times. She pops
Mm.
up everywhere. She leaves whenever she wants. Like she's coming and going. We don't really know what she's doing. We don't really know much about her. There's still a lot of mystery. And these two books are not small. They're thousands of pages between the two of them, right? So you're in this story for so long, and we're told constantly that Quoth and Denna are this key part of this story for Quoth's tragedy. And even after 2,000 pages, we don't really know Denna's part in all of this yet. We know she's living her own life, and Quoth knows nothing about it, but we don't know what it is. And that makes for good theories, but we're going into book 3 and we don't know where this story's going. And that's a lot of investment to ask for a reader to stick along for 2,000 plus pages and continue to stay invested. And that to me has always been one of those like put it in the bad, but it's part of the story. Rothfuss is patient in telling.
Yeah. And it does fall under that umbrella for me too of like we wouldn't be talking about it as much, we wouldn't be as invested in all of it if it weren't for all this mystery
Right.
and all this popping up all over the place. And it's I get that people want to see more more answers and less questions when it comes to the Kingkiller Chronicle. I think that is a fair reaction to be having when you've been waiting as long as you've been waiting, especially if you're someone who's been reading these books since the beginning. Of course, you want these answers, and you're feeling frustrated by it, and it's a valid reaction. And I guess my own take is always like, well, I think I think Rothfuss has said, I'm paraphrasing here, like it can be late once, but it can be bad forever.
Yeah.
So I'm like, I've got like, yes, you're valid in wanting it, you're valid in like if being frustrated, or whatever. But once it's out, and we want it to be good, and I'm willing to wait as long as it takes to get the answers to all these mysteries around Denna and the Quothenna relationship.
If there's any fantasy author that embodies that sentiment, it's Patrick Rothfuss for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'll say another thing that I hinted at around the when we're still in the good section was this idea that part of what's frustrating about the Denna relationship is, or the Quothenna relationship, is that we have a sense that of where it is going to end, and that sense suggests that it is not going to end well. So I was thinking the will they won't they thing can be tough when it feels like you already know that they won't.
Yeah.
So what keeps us invested and enjoying and all this kind of stuff when we're dealing with a will they won't they? Because those are classic things that we consume a lot of that and seem to enjoy it, but I think a lot of the joy for people comes from this like rooting for it to end well. So when things look like they won't go well, they're like, "Oh no, it's not going the way I want." But then they get that moment where it looks like it is going to go well and it is going to end well. and they will. And then they're like, yes, this is good. But when it comes to the Kvothe relationship, both moments just make you feel sad because it's either it's starting to look like the Kvothe relationship is not going well in the moment and you're like, oh no, here it goes, this is where it goes awry, and that's sad. Or it's starting to look like things are going well and there's this lingering feeling that, oh no, like it's going well right now but the other shoe is going to drop and this is going to be even worse in the end. And again, another thing that is beautifully realistically and complexly portrayed by Rothfuss, but it doesn't really invite the reader to feel a lot of joy around the Kvothe relationship.
So well said. I feel like that's always been kind of one of the hooks of Kingkiller, is that you know you're going to end up at the Waystone Inn at some point. Kvothe is a man waiting to die. So when you're in the middle of all this teenage romance, it's like, well, you know, there's still a whole nother book and we know this isn't going to work out the way that we might be expecting it to just from what the scene is showing us. And I think people just want the plot to kind of move along and like let's go, like with this meandering will they won't they stuff, let's make it happen. And for a lot of people, I feel that especially, you know, as we're continuing to wait for our third book here.
Right. And that's another big complaint that I think fits in the bad section, which is that people feel the plot slows down when Denna is in the mix. And these Kvothe and Denna moments don't really drive what I think a lot of people perceive the plot to be forward. I guess this is a hard one for me to talk about because I think like it's fair to want a story that is like Kvothe avenges his parents against these evil Chandrian. I think in a lot of ways Rothfuss has teed us up to expect that in some way. And then people who that is a big part of what they're reading for see these Kvothe moments, along with a bunch of other moments in the series, as distracting from the plot. And it's like, oh, Denna's here. Like, it's just going to be a bunch of Kvothe pining over her and hanging out with her. And, like,
we know it's not going to work out anyway.
Right. Exactly. So it's like, that's one of the biggest complaints I see is that, like, even if people like Denna as a person or they even get some, like, see good things about the Denna and Kvothe relationship, they see it as a distraction from the plot. I don't think it's even I think there's more to be said with the Chandrian and Denna, but maybe that's in the crooked section. But yeah, that's a big complaint, I think.
And it's a valid one. Anything else we need to vent in the bad section before we move on to the crooked?
I'll say the last thing I wanted to mention was that people find the Kvothe, like Kvothe and Denna interactions, sometimes they find them sappy and pining and annoying and things like that. I don't. It's so bad. I'm bad at the bad section, Charles. I can't do it. I'm like, people think this, but he was like, yeah, I think that is another talking point that people have about the Kvothe relationship, and it'll be relevant to the crooked part.
And look, we talked about the idea of tack and the beautiful game, and that's such a huge part of their relationship. And if you're just not invested in these moments of just enjoying the moment for what it is, when you're worried about like the plotting and the fact that we know where this is going and, you know, all these other things, then there's not much left for you at that point. But the idea is that it's this beautiful game, that we're able to have this honest portrayal of a lovesick teenagers that we know will end in tragedy, and we can play that game. But, you know, if you're trying to win, it can be a little frustrating.
Right. And I think also people find it frustrating when it reminds them of maybe their own teenage, or not even necessarily teenage, but their own romantic relationships that have not
or attempt at
gone
romantic
well,
relationships.
yeah. So I think that it's fair if this brings you to a place where it's reminding you of your own heartbreak, that maybe that's not what you're looking for in a book, even
Yes.
if it is well portrayed.
Yes, it could be triggering at some level for people that would be sensitive to these kinds of
Right.
moments, for sure.
It is for me too. I just want to feel that way for whatever reason.
And Dylan loves it, so
Yeah.
that brings us to the third piece to all of this 3-part episode here that we so beautifully planned.
Accidentally.
And that is The Crooked. And that is, of course, as we mentioned at the top of the episode, related to Bast's comment when Kvothe is like, she was perfect. And Bast interjects, Denna had a crooked nose.
Right.
A crooked nose.
A crooked nose. Yeah.
A crooked nose.
To us, this has always symbolized the idea that behind, or maybe underneath, all of Kvothe's portraying Denna as this perfect person and pining over her and all this kind of stuff is we cannot trust everything that he says about Denna or his relationship with Denna. And he might, Tales from the Waystone, actually, that's it. Tales from Waystone Kingkiller podcast. Definitely, if you're enjoying this episode, you want to
definitely
check
them out.
They're awesome.
If you're listening to this and you like it, then you just gotta go check it out.
Yeah. So they tagged us in a. They were highlighting some of the. Phoenix was highlighting some of the 7-word segments from the book, and she highlighted, "Let's view her in a rosy light." And I was like, no, all my Denna, all the Denna fans out there at the FTF podcast are liking this. So so appreciate that always. And I think that Kvothe does view her in a very rosy light. And because of that, we can't trust everything that he's saying.
Yes, and that is such an important piece to the story. And that's what we've always, like, when it comes to addressing some of these things in the bad, that's something that Dylan and I repeat over and over when we talk Kingkiller. It's like, we need to consider, like, how the story is being told. It's intentionally 90% through Kvothe's perspective. And everything that Kvothe is telling us is romanticized. How many times have we read where it's like, oh, to tell the best story, you've got to embellish a little bit, or the best truths are things that are kind of like adjusted a little bit. We know Kvothe has a background as a storyteller and entertainer, someone who takes pride in this beautiful game of telling his life story. He demands it's told his way and no other way. Like, these are all things that we need to consciously be aware of. So when we get these moments at the Waystone Inn, which is not Kvothe's story controlled by Kvothe, it's Rothfuss showing us what's happening, and Bast says, well, Denna actually wasn't this perfect visage that you're describing. Like, she had a bit of a crooked nose, where it's like, oh, well, that's not how I was picturing Denna. It gives us a glimpse into the inconsistencies in Kvothe's story, or the implications that Kvothe is trying to convey about Denna that we need to pay attention to. And that's why we've called this The Crooked, and that's why we've, like, that line from Bast talking about Denna's nose has been such a important one for us.
Yeah, and I mean, crooked also implies some degree of distortion, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's always, Rothfuss is so precise in how he chooses to convey things, and I personally believe that the choice to go with something like a crooked nose, to have something a little askew from just being straightforward, is probably deliberate from the great Patrick Rothfuss, and this is a little bit of that crooked perspective we get. So a big quote that I had actually, or I saw in a video that was sent to us by a wonderful fan I've had some email exchanges with who's also named Charles.
Hmm.
So another great Charles in the world of the FTF podcast. There's just so many of them. Uh, there's a video where he wrote like children stories that are not actually children stories, and I won't say more than that, but they're really good. If you watch him read one, it's amazing. And something that he says during that is, if you're not paying attention, Rothfuss that is, says, if you're not paying attention to what's in this book, it is not my fault. And I've
Such an
always loved that.
amazing quote.
Yeah.
A lot of my
And
favorite authors you could apply that quote to, like Rothfuss and Abercrombie
right.
and the like, where it's like, if you don't realize what you're reading, it's not the author's fault, it's intentional.
Right. And you cannot, it's fair to not like it,
Yeah.
but you can't just pin it all on the author if it came from not paying attention. And I think that with Rothfuss, everything's in there to say that this story is not the reliable narration of all of these events that we discussed in the bad, I guess. It's like this idea of it's frustrating to me that Kvothe is always pining after her, and another thing that people get frustrated with is that she's like perfect in every way, and it's like, well, no, she probably isn't, and it is more true to the like reality of the story, I guess, which maybe is an oxymoron.
And that's such an important part of the Kvothe relationship, is whatever version we're getting is Kvothe's version. And this is how Kvothe is reflecting on his life and reflecting on his early relationship with Denna. And that's how that's the lens we have to filter these scenes through. And to me, that just adds a layer of intrigue. It makes me want to know what happens with Kvothe and Denna. Like, what is Denna's real story is my question. Like, who even is Denna? Like, we really don't know. So all we know is she's a woman that is real, that has a nose that's crooked. Those are facts. And we don't know where she is now. We don't know if, what she's doing, and when she's not popping up in Kvothe's life so conveniently at all these random places. It's like, what is she really up to? Are these meetups too convenient? Who knows?
Yeah, well said, Charles. And I think some people would disagree with you that you can even be 100% sure that she's a woman and not the moon, embodied.
There's some great Denna theories out there.
Yeah, some people think that she's literally the moon. Charles and I have always thought that it's more an analogy or a parallel, that she is like the moon in some ways.
Yeah, it's a nice metaphor, but I don't
right.
think Kvothe is like lying on the rocks with the moon.
Right, and I'll cue the Rothfuss gif that says they're teenagers, but I'll say that a big thing when it comes to the crooked is this idea of Denna and Kvothe as potential mirror images of each other.
Yeah.
And it's, first off, no wonder Kvothe is so in love with her if she's his mirror image.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
Yeah, it's makes sense for Kvothe's narcissism that what could be more appealing to him than a mirror image of him. And then this bit that's really interesting from the perspective of the crooked is, are we just not getting Denna's perspective? And is that a big reason why a lot of people don't like the Denna character? And basically, a lot of people like Kvothe, although that, some people don't too.
That's another controversy.
Right. But more people like Kvothe than like Denna, I think is fair to say, probably. And I'll say it seems like it's easier to justify Kvothe's frustrations with Denna for us as the readers sometimes than it is to justify Denna's frustrations with Kvothe, and she kind of gets a bad rap because of that. But we know that she is actually looking for Kvothe a lot, and though it doesn't, and we know Kvothe is looking for her too, but it doesn't seem that way to us as readers because we spend so much time literally with Kvothe just like walking around Imre, like, oh, is Denna here? Is Denna there? No.
Right.
And we feel like Kvothe is just pining after her constantly, and sometimes we feel like she isn't showing him the same level of commitment to the relationship, and I think people find that frustrating, but I think that is the crooked at work, is
Yes.
that we aren't there with Denna when she is looking for Kvothe, and she finds Kvothe. I would say if you look at just the facts, which honestly probably fair view, Charles, with how crooked things
Yeah.
are, to say that we really can't take anything for granted. But if we assume the literal events of like who found who is true, Denna seems to find Kvothe more than Kvothe finds her,
Hmm.
which, with how hard Kvothe can be to locate, maybe implies she's having even more instances of searching through Imre or wherever looking for Kvothe.
Yeah, and that's so well said. You talk about Quoth's narcissism, right? And so it's like
Mm.
anytime we're talking about Denna, it's how Denna affects Quoth, right? Quoth is only talking about
Yes.
Denna in the perspective of, okay, she's talking to me now and I'm feeling this way about her. And when she's gone, it's like she does not exist because Quoth isn't thinking outside of like
Hmm.
his immediate self. And that's how he gets into trouble constantly, right? Where
For sure.
people are like, oh, you're going to leave the school, right? He's like, what are you talking about? I won the lawsuit or whatever. And it's like, yeah, but you like upset everyone here and no one wants you here. He's like, oh, okay, I guess I'll leave. And he
Hmm.
says and does stuff in politics that gets him in trouble all the time just because he doesn't think outside of his own little world in his head. And so Denna enters that world and we see those moments, but then she leaves and we don't get anything. And that's that crooked mirror that you had mentioned that we're looking through. And I think that's just another super important aspect of this crooked segment is Quoth is so self-absorbed that we're
Yeah.
only getting Denna and how Denna relates to Quoth, and we're not getting these other pieces. And it's these other pieces that are going to be super, super important. Quoth is going to wake up at some point and start thinking, oh, I wonder what Denna does in her free time, which she never really thinks about. So it's like I wonder what she's into. I wonder how she spends her days. Maybe he'll start asking those questions soon.
Yeah, that's fair, Charles. And I think to continue to build on that idea of Quoth's narcissism presenting a crooked perspective on Denna, we as readers are being told the story that is so Quoth
Yeah.
centric because our narcissistic, at this point, bartender basically
Yeah.
is telling us his life story, and it's going to be so focused on things that have happened to him that I think that's part of why it feels like the plot slows
Mm.
around Denna, because if the plot is just Quoth and his amazingness and his story of how he became a legend, then this one person who comes along and makes him act like a buffoon doesn't feel like she is advancing the plot.
Yeah.
But that's Quoth's, I think, narcissism and the perspective that's made askew by that kind of changing the way that we view Denna.
So well said. Anything else about the crooked before we ride off into the sunset?
Well played, Charles. Well, I have more to, but I will. I'll leave these later discussions because they're kind of the other things I wanted to talk about, Charles, are more like theory based on the idea of the
Mm.
unreliable narration, and maybe we can do another episode at some point. Uh, I'm never short of things to say about Kingkiller in general and Quothena in particular, and I
Kingkiller
have a lot of
theory episode.
continue to.
I think that's
Yes,
exciting
yeah, that could be cool.
for
So
sure.
maybe some theorizing later on, and I'll save these talking points.
Wow, oh, great tease. I agree. I think, there's a time and place for the theories, but this idea of not knowing and this distorted lens of the narration just opens the door for all kinds of really, really
Mm.
interesting theories that I would love to get into.
Me too, Charles. I think this whole interaction with you, for me, Charles,
Mhm.
goes in the category of the good. I've had a great
Aw.
time chatting
I would
Kingkiller with you,
put
as I
this,
always do.
I would segment this in the good as well, Dylan. It has been my pleasure to be riding alongside you in this 2-horse town.
You're really committed to. I
I
do
don't know
enjoy
a
your
lot of
commitment
Western
to that.
tropes, so I'm trying. Partner.
Yeah. I've totally forgotten that was the thing we were doing. Is that sweet outro music going to be normal?
No.
Oh
no. Let's get it going. Thank you, everyone, for joining us on this epic spaghetti western of an episode that is Denna and Kvothe, the good, the bad, and the ugly.
No, the crooked.
And the crooked, not the ugly. I didn't say ugly. Don't sue us, movie studios. Clint Eastwood.
They're listening, Charles. I don't think, they tuned out once we got into the bad.
Yeah.
They're big Denna fans.
Yeah, I like to think so anyway. If you like what you heard today, everyone, let us know. Support the show by interacting with us on Twitter at the FTF Podcast with a number 1 at the end. We're also on Facebook and Instagram at the FTF Podcast. You can also send us an email at the FTF Podcast at gmail.com. Now, Dylan,
send me things about Denna. Send me conversation points
only if
about
you're
Denna.
ready, because he will engage quite thoroughly. So be ready for that. Dylan, if people like what they heard and they want to continue to support the show, they're like, you know what? These are 2 cool hombres, and I want to show them some love. What can they do if they're listening on Apple Podcasts?
Toss 5 stars to our podcast, and all you gotta do is scroll down on that Apple Podcast page until you see stars. We'd love it if you chose to click 5 of those. If you happen to have some extra time, then you can leave us a review, and that's super helpful for people finding our podcast and things like that. But just listening, all of you wonderful folks, that is more than enough. We appreciate it so much.
Yes. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Thank you. And as always, go forth and conquer, friends.